Hello, I'm Michelle and I'm a pattern artist. Today I'm going to walk you through my art journal and give you 6 ideas that you could use in your art journal as well. If you're thinking about starting an art journal, you really don't have to have expensive supplies to get started. I use just a basic sketchbook for my art journal, and I also have a pack of Crayola markers that I use a lot. Alyssa Burke here on YouTube, who I get a lot of my inspiration from, she uses just composition notebooks for her journals. So you really don't have to worry about going out and spending a ton of money on art supplies if you're thinking about starting an art journal. What I like to do for my journal spreads is create layers. So I'll start out with a base layer, and that could be anything from acrylic paint to watercolor paint, paper, marker, whatever you want. So here what I did was painted these little areas with acrylic paint in different colors, and then I'll create another layer on top of that by drawing with marker. I also used some pen to create some more layers over in this area, and you're basically just drawing on top of what you already drew before. So as you can see here, that first layer is acrylic paint, and then I went over that with a black paint pen, and then went over that for a third layer with a white paint pen. And I really love the dimension that you create by adding multiple layers within the page. And that brings me into my next idea, which is incorporating either patterned craft paper or free printables that you find online. Like for this, I used faux book pages that I found online, just printed out at home, just on basic printer paper. And I did that on this spread as well. And I used a book page under this, under the acrylic paint here. And that kind of goes along with creating layers. You can use paper as your first layer, paint over that, draw over it, whatever you want to do. And for this one, I just cut out these faux pages and just glued them on randomly. For this spread, I believe I used watercolored pencils, and I just pretty much just scribbled, so that adds a nice colorful background. And then I just went over that and made random embellishments with acrylic paint and then fine tip marker. And it looks like I also went over that with colored pencil as well. I will say though, depending on what paper you're using, watercolor may or may not work. For this spread, I made a colorful background by just scribbling with my Crayola markers and then going over that with a wet paintbrush to blend it out and make it look similar to watercolors. And then I went over that with my black and white paint pens. As I mentioned before, I'm a pattern artist, so you'll notice that a lot of my spreads have pattern drawings like this. For this spread, I started out by drawing little swirls and lines with orange marker, and then on the left side, I filled in the rest of the page with green marker, and then the right side, I filled in the page with green watercolor paint. And then over that background layer, I drew patterns with black and white paint pens. So one of my favorite things to do in this art journal is creating collages. For this, I used watercolor paint to paint over printer paper, and then I ripped up that paper into strips and then glued that down into my journal. I did the same thing on the left side, except I cut out circles, and then I also printed out more faux book pages and printed circles out of that as well. I drew a few black patterns with my paint pen and then cut that out and glued that on top. For this, I used acrylic paint for these arches, and then for the patterns, again, I used my black paint pen, and then I used my Faber-Castell pen to just fill in these little lines. This was another collage that I did with printer paper. I used those Crayola markers to just scribble onto the printer paper, and then I ripped that up into a bunch of little pieces and glued that all down. I also drew this on the printer paper as well. I did that with just a colored pencil and one of my Faber-Castell pens. This I also did on printer paper, and then I ripped it out so that it had that nice ripped edge. And then once I glued in the collage, I just went in with some markers to fill in those empty spaces. These were done with fine tip pens. This is a collage that I did with cardstock. I started out with pieces of cardstock that I painted patterns over with black acrylic paint, and then I painted a few that were just a solid color. Once I did that, I cut them up into random shapes, and then I arranged those cut up pieces of paper onto the page until I came up with something that I liked. When I had the collage glued down, there were a few areas that I wanted to fill in, so I drew some patterns with my paint pen and with the Faber-Castell pen. For this spread, I started out with an abstract acrylic painting as my base layer, and then I filled up the rest of the page with patterns with paint pens. You can use your art journal to document your travels, like I did here, and to do that, you can collect things from your trip, like tickets or pamphlets. I saved this from a Broadway playbill from when we went to go see the Book of Mormon. We went to the Museum of Modern Art, so I saved the little map that we got while we were there. We went to the Met, so I saved that map. This is a ticket from one of the art museums we went to. So saving little things like that from your trip is great because you can cut stuff out of them and then glue them into your art journal. I printed out some photos from our trip. I used washi tape for little embellishments like this. You can use the washi tape to create space to write over if you want to write a little bit about your trip. I taped this museum ticket in here with washi tape, and then underneath that I glued in another photo and then wrote a little summary about our time in New York. And again, I did a little bit of collaging here. I drew this colorful background with colored pencils on printer paper and just ripped it up, and then I printed out a map of New York and use that for the background over here. If you don't have a photo printer, you could also draw some of the sites that you saw. You don't necessarily have to use photos. If you're a reader, you can create a spread based off of a book that you read. This is one that I did after I read the book Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. I used an element from the book, which was the box. If you know, you know. I drew my own spin on the box, and then I used a quote from that book. I got this idea from Katie Mai here on YouTube. She does reading wrap-ups where she draws illustrations based off of the books that she's read for each month, and I absolutely loved that idea. And that's about it for my art journal so far. Hopefully I've given you some ideas to get started on your art journal. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.